Hello, and welcome back to Best Sleep History. It's so good to have you here again tonight. Go ahead and settle in, get comfortable, and let yourself relax. Tonight, we're going on a journey through some of the most bizarre, fascinating, and sometimes downright dangerous sports and games that ancient people actually played. Some of these will make modern extreme sports look tame. Others will just make you scratch your head and wonder what people were thinking. But here's what's beautiful about it. Through these strange games and competitions, we get to see ancient people being human. Playing, competing, celebrating, taking risks, and finding joy in the most unexpected ways. So take a deep breath, close your eyes if you'd like, and let's travel back in time to discover the strangest sports history has to offer. We'll start with perhaps the most intense sport in ancient history, the Mesoamerican ball game, played by the Maya, Aztec, and other civilizations of Central America for over 3,000 years. Imagine a stone court, shaped like a capital wandron, with high walls on either side. The court is over 100 feet long, and mounted high on each wall is a stone ring set vertically, not horizontally like a basketball hoop, but sideways, so the whole faces parallel to the ground. The game itself used a solid rubber ball, about the size of a basketball but much heavier, sometimes weighing up to 8 pounds. And here's where it gets interesting. Players couldn't use their hands or feet. They could only hit the ball with their hips, thighs, and upper arms. Players wore protective gear, thick leather padding around their waists and hips, sometimes knee pads. They needed it because that heavy rubber ball, flying at high speeds, could break bones. We've found skeletons of ball players with distinctive injuries, fractured ribs, broken forearms from blocking shots. The objective was to keep the ball in play and score points by getting it through that stone ring on the wall. An incredibly difficult feat, since the ring was barely larger than the ball itself and positioned about 20 feet off the ground. Some games could go on for hours with no one scoring at all. But here's what makes this sport truly strange, truly intense. In some games, especially ceremonial ones, the stakes were life and death. Now, historians debate exactly how this worked and how often it happened. It wasn't every game. Most were probably played for sport and entertainment, like any game today. But in important ritual games, there's evidence that either the losing team, or sometimes the winning team, or perhaps the team captains, were sacrificed to the gods. Let that sink in for a moment. Imagine playing a sport where you might literally die at the end. Some scholars believe it was actually an honor to be sacrificed after winning, that the best players would be chosen to join the gods. Ball courts were often built near temples, and the game had deep religious significance, representing the cosmic struggle between light and darkness, life and death. Archaeological sites show carvings of ball players being decapitated, their blood feeding the earth. The ball itself was sometimes said to represent the sun, and the game its journey across the sky. It's hard for us to understand this mindset today, where sports are entertainment, separate from religion and life or death stakes. But for the ancient Maya and Aztec, the ball game was a sacred act, a way to communicate with the divine, to maintain cosmic order. And yet, despite the intense ritual significance, it was also popular entertainment. Common people played versions of it for fun. Children played with smaller balls. It was woven into the fabric of daily life, even as it touched the sacred. Let's travel across the ocean now, to ancient Rome, where entertainment reached levels of spectacle that are hard to imagine today. You've probably heard of gladiator fights in the Colosseum. But did you know the Romans also staged full-scale naval battles inside the arena? These were called naumachia, and they were exactly as extravagant as they sound. Picture this: the Roman Colosseum, or sometimes specially built artificial lakes, flooded with water. Real ships, smaller versions of war galleys, but still substantial vessels, floated in this makeshift sea. On these ships, crews of prisoners, slaves, or condemned criminals, dressed as ancient warriors, would recreate famous historical naval battles. The first naumachia was staged by Julius Caesar in 46 BCE, before the Colosseum even existed. He had an artificial lake dug on the Campus Martius and filled it with water from the Tiber River. Two fleets, representing Egyptians and Tyrians, with thousands of participants, fought to the death while crowds watched from the shore. Later emperors outdid each other with increasingly elaborate naumachia. Emperor Claudius staged one on a natural lake, involving 19,000 participants. Emperor Nero held one with sea monsters, trained seals and other marine animals, swimming among the ships. The engineering required was remarkable. The Colosseum's underground chambers could be flooded through a sophisticated system of aqueducts and drains. The water had to be deep enough for the ships to float, but shallow enough that it could be drained quickly for the next event, perhaps a gladiator fight or wild animal hunt. The battles themselves were chaotic and brutal. Ships would ram each other. Participants would fight with swords and spears, trying to board enemy vessels. Men would fall or be thrown into the water, struggling in armor that dragged them down. These weren't simulations. They were real battles with real casualties. The Romans didn't play-act violence. They wanted the genuine article, spectacle soaked in blood. For the prisoners and slaves forced to participate, it was often a death sentence. But there was a grim possibility of survival. If you fought well enough, impressed the crowd, earned the emperor's favor, you might be spared. Some participants were experienced sailors or soldiers, and their skills might save them. The crowds loved it. Tens of thousands would pack the Colosseum or gather around artificial lakes, eating and drinking, cheering as ships sank and men died. It was entertainment on a scale and with a brutality that modern sensibilities find disturbing. Yet it reveals something about Roman culture: their engineering brilliance, their love of spectacle, their comfortable relationship with public violence, and their vast resources that allowed them to flood buildings and stage battles for entertainment. The last recorded naumachia was held in 89 CE under Emperor Titus. The practice eventually faded, perhaps because it was too expensive, too complex, or because tastes changed. But for a time, naval warfare was Roman entertainment. Now let's visit ancient Greece, home of the Olympic Games, and a sport that made modern mixed martial arts look civilized by comparison. It was called pankration, which literally means all powers or all strength, and the name was apt, because in pankration, almost anything was allowed. Pankration combined boxing and wrestling with virtually no rules. You could punch, kick, grapple, throw, and submit your opponent. You could strike with open hands or closed fists. You could kick anywhere on the body. You could apply joint locks and chokes. There were only two rules: no biting and no eye gouging. That's it. Everything else was fair game. Fights continued until one participant submitted, usually by raising his index finger, or until he was knocked unconscious, or in rare cases, killed. Yes, deaths happened, though they were uncommon and considered tragic rather than entertaining. The sport was incredibly popular at the Olympic Games and other pan-Hellenic festivals. Winners achieved celebrity status, were honored in their home cities, and sometimes earned fortunes. Training for pankration was intense. Athletes would practice on heavy bags stuffed with sand or grain. They'd spar with partners, learning to fall safely, to escape holds, to endure pain. Some trained in special schools called palestra, where they'd oil their bodies and grapple on sand. Famous pancratiasts became legends. There was Aricion of Phigalia, who won the Olympic pankration in 564 BCE, even though he died during the match. According to the story, his opponent had him in a chokehold, but Aricion managed to break his opponent's ankle with a footlock. The opponent submitted from the pain just as Aricion died from strangulation. Since the opponent had submitted first, Aricion was declared the winner posthumously, probably the only dead Olympic champion in history. Then there was Polydamas of Scotusa, supposedly so strong he could stop a chariot being pulled by two horses, could kill a lion with his bare hands, and once held up a collapsing cave roof while his friends escaped. These stories were probably exaggerated, but they show the mythical status pankration champions achieved. The sport required not just strength, but strategy and technique. A skilled, smaller fighter could defeat a larger opponent through superior skill. Holds and submissions were as important as striking. It was a thinking person's sport as much as a violent one. Pankration eventually died out as Greek culture declined and Rome rose to dominance. The Romans preferred their own combat sports, gladiatorial combat and boxing with deadly metal-studded gloves called cestus. But pankration's legacy lived on, and modern MMA is, in many ways, a rediscovery of what the ancient Greeks already knew: that a combat sport with minimal rules, testing all aspects of fighting ability, is compelling to watch and practice. Let's shift to ancient Egypt now, where sports and games were a beloved part of daily life, recorded in countless tomb paintings and carvings. Wrestling was particularly popular, practiced by everyone from peasants to pharaohs. But Egyptian wrestling had a unique twist that made it especially challenging. Wrestlers competed while covered in oil. Imagine trying to grapple with an opponent whose body is slick with oil. Every hold becomes uncertain. Gripping becomes nearly impossible. The sport required exceptional technique because brute force alone wouldn't work. Your opponent would simply slip free. Tomb paintings from around 2000 BCE show dozens of wrestling positions and techniques. These aren't random images. They're instructional diagrams, showing proper form for throws, holds, and takedowns. The ancient Egyptians took their wrestling seriously enough to document it comprehensively. The oil wrestling wasn't just about difficulty, it was also practical. Egypt was hot, and oil protected the skin from sun and sand. It also made the sport less injurious, as slippery opponents couldn't maintain the kind of crushing holds that might break bones. Matches were held during festivals and celebrations. Wrestlers competed in front of crowds, sometimes for prizes, sometimes for honor. The pharaoh himself might watch and even participate. There are records of pharaohs who prided themselves on their wrestling prowess. But wrestling wasn't the only Egyptian sport. They also had a form of fencing using wooden sticks with protected tips, where participants wore masks to protect their faces. They played team handball games. They had archery competitions, swimming races, and rowing competitions on the Nile. One particularly interesting Egyptian game was Kuza Lawiza, a form of tug-of-war where two teams would face each other, and through rhythmic chanting and pulling, try to drag the opposing team across a line. It was as much about coordination and rhythm as pure strength. Children played versions of these games too. We found ancient toys, wooden swords for pretend fighting, balls made of leather or linen, even board games like Senet, which was popular among adults and children alike. What's touching about these archaeological finds is how they show ancient Egyptian families at play. Parents teaching children to swim in the Nile, siblings wrestling in the sand, friends competing in games during festivals. The oil-covered wrestlers grunting and straining weren't just athletes. They were ordinary people finding joy in physical competition, not so different from us today. Now let's travel to ancient Japan for something completely different. A sport where the goal wasn't to defeat your opponent, but to cooperate with them. Kemari is a ball game that dates back at least 1,400 years in Japan, and it's still played today in ceremonial contexts. The game is simple in concept, but difficult in execution. Players stand in a circle and kick a ball, trying to keep it in the air as long as possible without letting it touch the ground. The ball, called a mari, was traditionally made of deer skin and stuffed with barley or sawdust. It was about 6 inches in diameter and relatively light, designed to be kept airborne through gentle kicks. Here's what makes Kemari unique. There are no winners or losers. There's no competition. The goal is collaborative, for the group to achieve something beautiful together. Players, traditionally 8 of them, would wear elegant court dress, flowing robes, formal headwear. The game was played in gardens, often with a cherry tree, willow, maple, and pine planted at the 4 corners, representing the 4 seasons. Each player was assigned a position near one of these trees. When the ball came to you, you'd kick it gently to another player, using the inside of your foot. The kick had to be controlled, at the right height and speed for the next player to receive it comfortably. The aesthetic was as important as the athleticism. Kicks should be graceful. Robes should flow elegantly. The ball's arc through the air should be pleasing to watch. It wasn't about showing off individual skill. It was about contributing to collective beauty and harmony. Kemari was particularly popular among the Japanese nobility during the Heian period, around 800–1200 CE. Court officials would play during festivals and celebrations. The game was considered a refined pursuit, developing coordination and grace. Records tell of remarkable achievements. One group supposedly kept the ball aloft for over 1,000 kicks. Whether this is true or exaggerated, it shows that endurance and consistency were valued. The philosophy behind Kemari reflects broader Japanese cultural values: harmony, cooperation, the importance of the group over the individual, and finding beauty in disciplined practice. It's the opposite of combat sports or competitive games. Instead of defeating others, you work together toward a shared goal. Kemari fell out of popular practice after the medieval period, but was preserved by certain families and religious institutions. Today, it's occasionally performed as a cultural demonstration, usually at Shinto shrines during festivals. Modern participants wear traditional costumes, and the game is played exactly as it was 1,000 years ago, a living connection to the past. Now let's visit ancient Ireland for a sport that's still played today and claims to be the fastest game on grass: hurling. Hurling dates back at least 3,000 years, mentioned in Irish mythology and early medieval texts. It's played with a wooden stick called a hurley and a small ball called a sliotar. The objective is to hit the ball into the opposing team's goal or over a crossbar. Here's what makes ancient hurling strange and intense. There were few rules. Teams could number in the hundreds, and games could last for days. Early matches weren't played on defined fields with set boundaries. They might start in one village and end in another, miles away. Teams would form from rival clans or neighboring communities. Disputes were sometimes settled through hurling matches instead of warfare, though the matches could be nearly as violent. Players wielded their hurleys with aggressive abandon. Checking, striking an opponent's hurley or body, was allowed and expected. Injuries were common. The game required toughness as much as skill, but it also required remarkable hand-eye coordination. The gladiator could fly at speeds over 100 miles per hour when struck properly. Players had to catch it on their hurley, balance it there while running, and strike it accurately toward the goal, all while opponents tried to knock them down or steal the ball. Ancient Irish law texts mention hurling frequently, including legal provisions for injuries sustained during play. If you were hurt in a match, you couldn't sue your opponent. You'd accepted the risk by playing. But if someone struck you unfairly after the game ended, that was actionable. Hurling features prominently in Irish mythology. Heroes like Cú Chulainn were said to be skilled hurlers. One legend tells how Cú Chulainn, as a boy, killed a fierce guard dog by striking a gladiator down its throat with his hurley, choking it. He then offered to take the dog's place guarding the house until a replacement could be trained. That's how he got his name, which means Hound of Cualann. The game was so important to Irish culture that it survived centuries of English attempts to suppress it. The English, ruling Ireland, saw hurling as dangerous and potentially rebellious. Large gatherings of armed men, even if armed only with hurleys, made them nervous. Laws were passed banning the sport, but it continued in secret or defiance. Today, hurling is one of Ireland's national sports, played on defined fields with set rules and 15 players per side. But it retains much of its ancient character: speed, skill, toughness, and a certain glorious wildness that connects modern players to their ancestors from thousands of years ago. Finally, let's travel to ancient China for a sport that might be the ancestor of soccer or football as most of the world knows it: Cuju. Cuju, which means kickball, emerged in China over 2,300 years ago during the Han Dynasty. It was played with a leather ball stuffed with feathers or hair, and the objective was to kick it through a small opening into a net. In its earliest form, Cuju was primarily a military training exercise. Soldiers would play to improve their physical fitness, coordination, and teamwork. The game required running, jumping, and precise kicking, all useful skills for warriors. But Cuju quickly became popular entertainment. It spread from the military to the imperial court, and eventually to ordinary people. Different versions developed. In one version, players tried to keep the ball in the air as long as possible, similar to Kamari. In another, teams competed to score goals, more like modern soccer. There were even one-on-one competitions where players showed off trick kicks and ball handling skills, somewhat like modern freestyle football. The goals in competitive Cuju were unusual. Imagine a net about 30 feet in the air, with an opening only a foot wide. Scoring required incredible precision and power. Some wealthy families and palaces had permanent Cuju fields with elaborate goals. Emperor Taizong of the Tang dynasty was reportedly an enthusiastic Cuju player. Court records mention imperial matches and competitions. The sport was so prestigious that skilled players could earn positions at court through their athletic ability. Women played Cuju too, which was unusual for the time. Paintings and texts from the Song dynasty show women in elegant dress playing the game. For upper-class women especially, Cuju was the acceptable form of exercise and entertainment. The ball itself evolved over time. Early versions were solid, difficult to control. Later versions became air-filled, bouncing more predictably and allowing for more skillful play. This was a significant technological innovation. The Chinese developed inflatable balls centuries before Europe. Cuju declined after the Ming dynasty, eventually fading from practice. But FIFA, football's international governing body, has acknowledged Cuju as the earliest form of football, predating European versions by over a millennium. It's fascinating to imagine Chinese soldiers and aristocrats kicking balls through nets, developing techniques and strategies, playing a game that would eventually, in modified form, become the world's most popular sport. That ball bouncing through an ancient Chinese palace courtyard was the ancestor of the one being kicked around in every World Cup, every local park game, every schoolyard match today. And so we've journeyed around the ancient world, discovering sports and games that range from beautiful to bizarre, from cooperative to deadly. We've seen Mesoamericans playing with their lives on the line, Romans flooding arenas for mock naval battles, Greeks grappling in Pancratium with almost no rules, Egyptians wrestling, covered in oil, Japanese nobles gracefully kicking balls in gardens, Irish warriors hurling across countryside, Chinese soldiers inventing football. What connects all these strange and varied sports? The same thing that connects us to these ancient people. The human drive to play, to compete, to test ourselves, to find joy in physical challenge, and to come together through games. These weren't primitive people mindlessly engaging in violence or strange rituals. They were us, people who loved sports, who practiced and trained, who cheered for favorites, who told stories about legendary athletes, who played for fun and glory and meaning. The next time you watch a game, any game, remember that you're participating in something ancient. Human beings have always played. We've always competed. We've always found ways to challenge ourselves and each other, sometimes beautifully, sometimes dangerously, but always passionately. As you drift off to sleep tonight, let your mind wander through these ancient arenas and courts and fields. Imagine the crowds cheering, the athletes straining, the glory and the absurdity, and the pure human joy of it all. Sleep well, and I'll see you next time for another journey through the fascinating, strange, wonderful world of history. Good night.